Okay, welcome to our second session. My name is Tatjana Damjanovic. I'm a senior research officer here at TASO, and along with some other colleagues, I've been managing the theory-based evaluation projects, where we've been looking at some wellbeing interventions at two different universities, and I'm going to do a little whistle-stop tour of the projects, and then you'll hear from our wonderful panelists and evaluators as well. So, as you've heard, in 2024, we commissioned a variety of projects, and we also looked at doing some theory-based evaluation. We looked at two very different projects. We had a coaching project on the one side at Leeds Trinity University, and that was evaluated using a realist evaluation, which is a type of theory-based evaluation, and that was evaluated by Emma and Amira Tharani. We also had the boundary spanner project at St Mary's University, which involved what we call recreational interventions, which is art sessions and gym sessions as in a kind of drop-in structure, and that was evaluated by Bath SDR by Fiona. So a little quick word about theory-based evaluation. Some of you might be familiar with it. Some of you might be familiar with TASO's small n guidance, which is on our website. It's an umbrella term for quite a few different methods, but as an approach, it is an impact evaluation that looks at what works, but also how and why an intervention works. It really looks at the causal mechanisms behind an intervention. So it looks at the relationships, at all the factors, the contextual factors involved that you might have in your assumptions. It might not be able to tell you effect sizes in the way that a randomized control trial does, but it tells you about the relationships. So it gives us lots of nuance. It also examines alternative explanations, and it's something that we use for use of interventions with smaller cohorts. But it can also be used in systems change evaluation or whenever you can't find an easily comparable comparator group. So in this case, we were really looking at interventions with really quite small cohorts because we know that's happening a lot in the sector. So I'm going to quickly go through the two different case studies and then talk at the end about how they join together in our synthesis report, which is beautifully printed on the chairs. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the realist evaluation of coaching at Leeds Trinity University. So this was a coaching program delivered by an external provider, so trained coaches, professionals, delivering coaches to students from the global majority who had been flagged as at risk of disengagement. Those students were all offered 6 sessions of 1-hour coaching, all online. They could decide the pace of the coaching. They obviously also decided on the goals that they set within that coaching as well. Also in the intervention was the Leeds Trinity staff who were helping to provide proactive support. So this is something that we kind of term proactive support, but it was really helping the students engage with making that first appointment and remain engaged. And it's something we'll talk a little bit more later. So the evaluation used a mixed method. A lot of theory-based evaluation is mixed methods. We collected some administrative data, but also some qualitative data, and it really focused on that. And it used realist interviews, which is a form of sober-structured interviews, which really tests each part of that theory of change in quite a lot of depth. Peer researchers were involved in this study, mostly in the latter end of the analysis, and we also have one of the peer researchers here today, so please do talk to him. Here I'm just showing you what we call a context mechanism outcome cluster. I mentioned that theory-based evaluation really looks at the mechanisms. And when you develop a theory of change at the beginning of a project like this, you go into a lot of detail of all the assumptions that are underpin an evaluation. And then you break them down. And in realist evaluation, you break them down like this. We had about 5 causal pathways like this that were then tested in the realist interviews. I'm not going to go through each one, but you'll see the lovely diagrams in a synthesis report. So what we found in evaluating coaching was that proactive outreach really helped get some students make that first appointment, because unsurprisingly, the barriers that stop a student from engaging with their course might actually also stop them from engaging with the intervention. So that's needed as a bit of extra help. We did find that coaching generally helped for most students, except for those that had really difficult life circumstances, caring responsibilities, financial difficulties, things that were outside the kind of coaching realm. We also found that students' academic engagement improved, and this actually meant that they were submitting earlier, but also that academic engagement meant engaging more with the staff, that actually meant improving their health-seeker behaviours. And how that helped was through the coach-student relationship. This was found to be absolutely key. The coaches were really important in bolstering the students' self-esteem, in encouraging them to reframe their limiting beliefs, but also to set manageable steps. So I'm going to now talk about the qualitative impact protocol known as QUIP, that Bath SDR conducted when they were looking at the St Mary's intervention. So at St Mary's, they implemented an intervention of 2 different drop-in sessions because students would like different things. There were gym sessions on the one hand, art sessions on the other. They were 2-hour drop-in sessions, and it was open to everyone, including staff. Staff were really encouraged to come. Not a lot of staff managed to attend all the time, but they did. And this was run by staff at St Mary's, and the gym sessions also had some student coaches for safety reasons. And they were encouraged to just participate in the activity, but there was a general ethos of talking about well-being, signposting, and kind of bringing that very gently into the activity. The evaluation, the quick methodology is actually quite unique to Bath SDR, but is a combination of process-tracing and contribution analysis, which is under that theory-based umbrella. And what's really interesting about the interviews that Bath SDR did was that they look at stories of change. They look at the student lives as a whole. They ask about their course engagement, their friends, what societies they're part of. And they don't immediately ask about the intervention. The intervention was only asked about if the student hadn't mentioned it during the process of that. And that was actually conducted by peer researchers from St Mary's University. Again, we do have one here as well, if you would like to ask questions. And then the analysis was done by the Bath SDR team. And this is what analysis looks like when you're coding using the causal map software. Now, I think this is beautiful. It might look quite scary to some people. I appreciate it's very small, but what we can see here is basically a map that shows you the prevalence of some ideas that students were bringing up. So this thickest line here is showing you that the interventions led to students saying that they value the social space, that this helped them develop friendships, and this helped them develop a sense of belonging, which they link to mental well-being. So it really kind of shows you the map of that journey of reasoning students have. So that was one of the findings, obviously, that the social space improves friendships and a sense of belonging. We also found that the facilitators were really key in giving some informed support to the students. Just meeting them in a space that was informal, that wasn't that kind of one-to-one well-being chat, was really important to students. But also so were the activities themselves. Doing exercise, drawing, really helps your well-being. And sometimes the obvious needs to be said as well. But we also found that other factors were important. There were university events going on. Some of the students were already in contact with wellbeing services. And this shouldn't be ignored. It means that the interventions are part of a bigger context and they're connected to that. We actually found that there was little evidence of the interventions actually leading to students have a greater awareness of the formal support structures, which was an assumption we had made in the theory of change. But it was really the informal support that made the difference and the social aspects of the intervention. So I'm going to quickly just summarize this in what we've put in the TASO report, putting these ideas together. So overall, we think that building relationships is really key, and I think that's already been mentioned a little bit today. It fills a vital relational gap for students who might feel quite alone, whose sense of belonging might be disrupted by being commuter students. There's lots of reasons why that gap might exist. We've also pulled out the importance of having some personal support. Again, what I said about some barriers to engaging with your course might still be present with engaging with the intervention. And there really needs to be a flexibility within that for certain students to help them get into that intervention. Embedding interventions it's really important that if we're focusing on building relationships, that we also embed interventions to make them sustainable. Because those people having those relationships, i.e. the staff, building those connections, need to also to have a network of support supporting them. And also the sign one, that implementation problems become evaluation problems. So problems in the delivery of, for example, targeting the right students might come up as a problem about sampling in the evaluation. And this doesn't mean that you can plan everything and nothing will ever go wrong, but it does require time and flexibility in the evaluation process. And I am particularly talking about theory-based evaluations here, which kind of lend themselves to that flexibility. So our recommendations for practice is to encourage supportive relationships, invest in them, give them time, value that emotional labour that happens at university. Also to support the supporters in that same context of building those relationships, gives staff the time to do that, and also to help students engage with the intervention itself. And our recommendations for evaluation, again, for theory-based evaluations, which are perhaps done a bit less at the moment in the sector, is how important flexibility is when engaging with students. So they may not be answering your emails, and we've talked a little bit about that today. They might need you to talk to them through WhatsApp, or you need to meet them where they're at in the cafe downstairs. But with that, it does really need thinking about. Planning in lots of time. Theory-based evaluations begin with a really detailed theory of change, and that does just take time, as does working with peer researchers. They need training and support themselves. And it needs to be meaningful for them for it to work. And finally, in support of using theory-based evaluations in the sector, they don't just show what works and how they work, how the intervention works. but they also give us the wider context of the challenges around the interventions. It gives us a better understanding of the systems that the interventions are working in. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and you're going to hear from our wonderful panel. Oh, I was about to pass for my career as the super clever. Okay. Shall we start from this end and move down, and would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Hobson. I am a senior lecturer in physical education at Leeds University. I specialise in sports sociology and I'm very interested in why anticipation.
Hi, I'm Emma Roberts. I'm here today in place of Tharani. Who's unfortunately poorly, and she led the evaluation of the coaching program at Freelance.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Graph Social and Development Research, and I'm the specialist quick evaluator for the similarity project. And I should have that to do. This project was evaluated also with my colleague Rebecca, who's sent with us today.
Hi, I'm Syra Shakir from Leeds, Trinity University. I'm an associate professor in learning and teaching and strategic lead around race equity. So our intervention was coaching the gap.
Brilliant, thank you. So building relationships was really key finding across the projects, and I was just wondering if you could say more about the roles that played in the interventions and evaluations.
We can't give eye contact there. Who's going to go first? I'll jump in. Building relationships incredibly important. That trust, building those connections, feeling supported, being able to open up and be yourself, share your experiences. I think that was something the coaches did incredibly well with the students during the coaching sessions, and also for staff like myself who supported the students to engage with the program. The students need to feel that you've got their back, that you're genuinely interested in them. Little check-ins so that they feel they're an individual that's cared for and respected and valued. They're a name, not a number, all that kind of thing. If you believe in them and they see that, they start to believe in themselves a lot more. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, building relationships was at the heart of what we're trying to do. Before it was the wellbeing project, it was a building relationships project. So we started off with the idea that we wanted to use both the arts and gyms to create alternative spaces for students. Historically, we found that spaces, or the social spaces that exist in the university, are designed for the students who have always been in certain spaces, so whether it's sports teams or whether it's socialising. And I think there's been a lot of conversations today about the difference between academic and mental health support and actually those wellbeing spaces. We found that a lot of students weren't accessing the spaces that we thought were really important. And our Boundary Span project, the gym project, came from literally me being in the gym. I go to the gym in a very diverse area in West London, and we're told that males don't talk enough. And I'm in the gym and I'm seeing males constantly talking to each other in this space. The students we're told who are disengaged, males from working class backgrounds, males from diverse ethnic backgrounds, you see them in there having these conversations about all sorts of things, right? And so the project initially started off with, can we create a space where they can come along to the gym and they can train, running straight after when lectures are. So when there's some times where lectures are going to be lots of students on campus, we targeted our students that we saw as being traditionally seen as not being engaged. So commuter students was a term we used because trying to use the term working class, low income, there's a stigma around that. Well, we went, okay, we'll call it commuter students. So we targeted commuter students. And essentially what we did is we got them in the gym, training and working out. And then in terms of building relationships, my job was to introduce people to each other as much as sitting down and having a conversation with them. because we find that a lot of people sometimes struggle with their boundaries. And again, that's where the term boundary spanning came from. We then saw that we thought that was having some impact, so we then started incorporating some of our wellbeing stuff down to the gym sessions. And then obviously putting dyslexia stuff down to those sessions. And then trying to challenge some of those boundaries, those issues as well. So I think relationships are key. I think what's been in previous panel is those relationships are also very emotionally inspiring at times. I think, I'm not sure if I'm responsible to that yet, if I'm being honest.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I wanted to name check that actually. This project was all out of passion and was maintained through passion. And that's something that is possibly difficult to scale and to replicate. So that's something to bear in mind. But in terms of relationships, I think one of the very strong findings that came out was the opportunity for students to build relationships with lecturers, with academics who may feel difficult to speak to and as sensitive relations. So seeing them as outside of the context of the classroom and feeling relaxed enough to talk to them as humans and their peers and forward coaches who may be slightly further ahead in their academic journey and to offer that peer support. Those relationships would be key to helping students to have a sense of belonging at the university.
I think speaking as the evaluator of the Leeds Trinity coaching programme, relationships showed up in lots of different ways. The relationship with the referrer, which a lot of the time was Syra. The relationship with the coach, which was absolutely key to unlocking some of the outcomes we saw. The relationship with the institution, and going back to the previous panel, we were talking about emails and who the emails come from. One of the things we learned was that if a student was invited via their university email address, it often got ignored. But when they had a phone call or a WhatsApp or a text message, they were much more likely to engage. So speaking to them, they don't want an email from an institutional email account to an institutional email account. There's so much more value in personal communication, a personal invitation. We also spoke about students that we spoke to as part of the evaluation, spoke about relationships with friends, family, romantic relationships that they were able to work on as a result of the coaching. So, in turn, it helped them manage their time, it helped them manage their attitude and relationship with their university as well.
Just to build upon something you said there, I think something that really strikes me from my previous panel and moving on to this panel is this idea that actually, I think it was mentioned a few times, sort of numbers, size of cohorts, the ways which we communicate and the ways which relationships are built. And I think all of you who work in higher education will recognise that a significant challenge in the way that those relationships exist for the students prior to higher education than once they enter higher education. So one of the things that we tried to get around, and I'm not sure you all got there, was this idea that to access anything you had to send an email, right? And so the idea was to create a space where people can talk to someone without having to send the email to get there. So sometimes we'd have wellbeing staff in the gym or in the art session, and if there's a student who would benefit from talking to those people, actually they could book in a session there and then after they'd had a conversation with Howard, and Howard wasn't just a random person who was on the end of an email. Actually, Howard was someone that they'd had a chat with 5 minutes beforehand about Fulham at the weekend. And that's one of the things that I think commonly maybe found, going back to Fiona's point about size of cohorts and get to know staff. A lot of our students have done a BTEC. Some of those often in very small groups with their staff, so they might have been in a group of 10 students in class. But then we think that if we've got a cohort of 30, that's a fairly small group for universities, but that's a lot bigger than that 10. And so I think it's try and find the strategies and the ways to overcome that. That was one of the ideas behind the art space approach and geo-based approach was actually, here's a chance to have more contact with someone.
Yeah, that context was really important. And I hear that there were aspects of these evaluations, as there were interventions, where it was broader than well-being. Well-being is quite a big, broad definition. In terms of evaluating it, the kind of markers of well-being, could you say a little bit more about how you went about doing that?
The students don't use this term well-being. It's not something that they talk about spontaneously. What they do talk about is going to the gym, doing their skincare, making time for self-care, feeling better in themselves. So for me, I think a big part of what's important in this kind of work is leaving space. Whatever methodology we take, the students tell us what well-being is to them, rather than us having too many assumptions before we go in about what well-being is and what it should be.
We had the same approach in that we asked students to decide what they define as well-being. Similar things were coming out about self-care, and for them that was so partly about having safe space where the doctor could ask, which they felt they had to keep on at other times in university. Being able to access some kind of emotional support to help with emotional stability, which is a key marker for them, and developing friendships, really, really crucial for feeling that sense of real well-being. But I think both of our sort of approaches to this is not to ask people to rank themselves on a list of marked indicators that we think of well-being. It's more to get them to express what they define as well-being, just why, how they get to that. So,
That seems very important. I was wondering about the use of theory-based evaluation, both from an evaluative perspective and from the higher education perspective. What do you feel like you'll take away from this evaluation process in your research?
So I use theory-based evaluation a lot. And this particular approach was realist evaluation, which is a little bit more technical. There's a little bit more jargon involved. Yes, I would encourage higher education institutions to use theory-based evaluation. I think you have to hold some of the methodologies quite lightly and be prepared to blend them. We try the going by the book, going by what a textbook would tell you about realist evaluation. I believe that you have to put student well-being and care at the heart. That has to come first. So when we're designing our evaluation tools, our discussion guides, we need to be careful and mindful of what we're asking and how we're asking it. What else? I think one of my difficulties with it is putting quite complicated experiences and complicated lives into boxes. And part of my brain loves that because it helps us understand and make sense of it. But another part of my brain finds it really uncomfortable because it doesn't do justice to the complexity. So this is why I think a blended approach is right. My go-to approach is narrative, gets you a more grounded theory approach. So I think there is space for both.
Obviously the benefits of using a theory-based approach is that you're tapping into very rich narratives of the cause mechanisms that you're interested in. So that really enables you to test some of the levers that you put into a theory of change and to see where, if I do this, I might have more impact, and actually this has this impact. So it really helps to fine-tune themselves. It can be a daunting prospect because it is quite in-depth. So it's not cheap, it's not quick. There are ways of making it cheaper and quicker. And so I wouldn't be put off by, as you say, the sort of very in-depth guidance. There are ways of doing it in a more high-touch way. And I think I don't want to underplay the importance of monitoring data to whether or not sign that. So I think being able to triangulate some of your more complex and fresh findings is really crucial. That was something we had a problem with in our project. I think it's an issue in any university that has struggles with resourcing and not being able to capture as much quality data as we hoped at the beginning. We still had really incredible and rich findings, but we weren't necessarily able to tabulate those with, for example, attendance data or dropouts or that, which would be an interesting data models.
Just to maybe add to what Fiona said there, I think for me, someone who's organising the project, when they sat down to start this and they took my colleagues and they said, right, what do you think your theory changes? I think we started off giving some quite valid statements. And I think when Fiona really pushed, what causes this? What's the mechanism? How does this result in this change? How does that result in that change? That was actually really useful for us. It was mainly a day of sitting there and being really stretched. But when it came to filling in documents that we were sending into our heads of department or trying to get more funding from the person who's running the NDP, actually having that layer worked out was a really, really useful resource to draw upon. So while it was a bit time intensive to start off with, I think that's really useful.
So you like to add anything?
You take the words out of my mouth, Michael.
Sorry.
On many levels. I think I was just going to say it's for the takeaways.
Yeah.
Because you asked that specifically. And I think the main takeaway for me is that the students that did really well, they were successful in terms of what we call engagement at university. Students were attending more lectures, they were submitting work on time, they were reaching out to academic staff for help with their work. They felt better about themselves. They had this reframing of self-belief. So their self-esteem was raised, confidence. And, all the students on the programme who were in their second year of undergraduate degree, they all moved up to their final year. And all the students in the final year have, successfully graduated, gone on to do great things. Lots of them are with us doing postgraduate study and in contact with the others who are doing other things. So for me, the success is that students, not only just benefited academically or psychologically in many ways, but also, on a practical level, in terms of their study and progression. So, the coaches were absolutely remarkable. So one huge thing that I take away is that, coaching for students in HE is a really, supportive and beneficial process, and we should do more of it.
And you've had some students come back.
Oh, I almost forgot that one, yeah. So we've had students that have come back to support other students who are in the first iteration. And we're also running Coaching the Gap again as well. So thank you to Karen, who is the CEO of Flourish Mind somewhere at the back, who's been absolutely brilliant to work with and who genuinely really has the passion and drive to support students and learners. And I'm going to shout out Lewis as well, who's our peer researcher from Trinity University, who really, really helped with the analysis of the project.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to take some questions from the audience now. There's one at the back there. You can just wait for a mic so that we can all hear.
Oh, well done, all of you. It's a brilliant idea, and I do love the idea of coaches being like a buffer between student and support, and potentially saying it's perfectly normal to feel this distress. What you're going through is what possible goes through. So that's excellent. The two questions that I've got was, what boundaries do you give the coaches? So, you're going to overstep and get into what should be professional counselling. And then related to that, if they do signpost to a more professional counsellor or support services, can you comment on the economic model? Could we actually save money using coaches as a buffer?
I'm not convinced it works like that. Sorry. The coaches spend a lot of time contracting at the beginning, and they take a lot of care, and that is really important and really valued by students. It really helps the space feel as safe as possible and warm and friendly. And for many of the students, it's the first time they've had a space for them that looks like that and feels like that. The reason I say I don't think it works like that, I'm not sure about the cost. I'm not convinced that it's necessarily a cheaper option. I don't know. We'll have to run some numbers on that.
Evaluation.
Yeah, but what I would say is the coaches are highly skilled and very well trained and also very well recruited. And there's something about the coaches on this particular programme that was very relatable. Also important to say that all the coaches on this programme use the local majority. That's really some, but not all, of the students. That was really significant and quite transformational.
I'll just add one minor thing to your question, was that we had a whole safeguarding process in place. So if anything that came up that required like more substantial mental health intervention, there was a really clear process to how they'd be referred to our services at university. No.
We've got, okay.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing the insights that you've got from both these projects. And I think I have a question, one for each project. And I'm a student, so I come pick from the student perspective here as well. Firstly, in terms of coaching, I want to understand how coaches are different from personal tutors, and if the difference is only about, say, can be trained personal tutors to be those coaches. And then the other ones for the other project, where you spoke a bit about involving students who are otherwise less engaged. On completing the project similar with trying to engage students who are otherwise less engaged, and one thing we struggled with was defining what is engaged mean. So how did you define what is an engaged student mean, what are the characteristics of an engaged student? So I did a quick coaching first. Thanks for your question. So the coaches at Flourish Minds are professional coaches with a fully accredited qualification. Our personal tutors don't have that qualification at university, and that's pretty standard. But we do offer some basic training at university, like what we call coaching approaches to personal tutoring. So trying to equip personal tutors with some basic skills. But Karen at Flourish Minds is actually running a training program because some of our students can become peer mentors. I know mentoring is different to coaching, but we're trying to build that capacity and sustainable kind of movement going forward, that our students are able to be a mentor of the students, because we know that relatability is really, really important between our students. But
I'm just going to add to that, as someone who does personal tutoring, and I've heard a couple of times today that we need to get personal tutors more involved in some of these processes, and then we also say we need to make sure that we're hitting the right boundaries. I think there's two things that are really important first that's have been noted here. So the first thing for personal tutor perspective is that Syra's project is specifically focusing on global majority students. And we know there's an underrepresentation of global majority staff. So it provided some alternate individuals. I think the other thing is to actually that in this scenario, it's giving students a bit more bang for their buck, right? Like, I think it's £9,000, and I always pass the message on to my students. It's not just the lectures you pay money for, you pay money for all the other resources, all the other support services, etc. And having someone else you can go to, that means you can use that personal tutor more effectively, I think is what I understand is the idea behind coaching, or partly over behind coaching. When it comes to our project, I've probably used the wrong phrasing when I've used less engaged students. That's what's been used today. What I guess I was referring to is the groups of students, so working class students and students from a global majority backgrounds who we see historically things like are less present in terms of engaging in university life when it comes to clubs and societies and things like that. Well, I think that's what I'm referring to. Research is sort of showing that those spaces tend to be spaces that are dominated by white middle class cultures. And what we did is we tried to provide a space that was slightly different to those cultures. So just to give you an example, when I booked the gym, I had students for music on, right? There's no other space in the university where you can hear drill music playing. Now, me as a woke white sociologist sometimes felt a little bit uncomfortable with some of the lyrics within the drill music. But then in terms of breaking the boundaries, sort of having a bit of a jokey conversation about that actually changed some of those boundaries. So it was more creating a space where students could felt a bit more authentic to them and their interests than it was to saying, I'm going to try and engage people who are disengaged. One thing we found helpful was targeting key students. And what I mean by that is there'll be students who led a group of students, right? So the year before we actually started the evaluation, there was one student in my third year. He went to the gym all the time outside of the university, and all the other students looked up to him because of his physique. And so he would start bringing his mates, because they were like, Charlie, can you teach us how to lift? Can you teach me how to do this? And so it's a case of targeting people who bring other people. Which comes back to, I think, Syra's point and the point we've heard here about building that trust through trusted sources that then start to bridge some of those gaps, I think.
I think we've got time for one more question. I'm sorry that there's competition.
You haven't talked us during lunch. We are on the lunch after this. So maybe we can both say it at the same time. You started to answer my question around how you select the groups of people who feel use a sort of approach. I think my main thing is how do you get them there in the first place, like very first one? Because my experience has been savage within a session of other groups. They're usually targeted for this extra this, extra that, and that is so negative to them mentally. And if they're then targeted to get to how we use the space and how this and how that, again, it just sort of identify that.
Yes, there's definitely, we tried not to use the term wide anticipation because that has all sorts of connotations around it, right? I think I did my best code switching and put on my best South London Cockney geezer accent. If I'm being honest with you, but it was, I think the way we started the conversation was really important. So for me, it was, oh, so-and-so, oh, do you train at gym? That was the starting point. Then it was like, okay, so like, what do you do for this body part, that body part? That was the starting point, to show an interest in them. And then going, oh, by the way, I've booked this space. Like, if you're around after lectures and you want to come down with your mates, you can, right?
So was that in your capacity as personal tutor?
That was in my capacity as a lecturer. And I think we targeted it in a number of different ways. We didn't always get it right. But to try and starting off, that's how we started off, just target people we knew. Then I went round and spoke to lots of different classes, and I was just quite mindful of the images I used. So I might put up an image where there was the photos were maybe 5 or 6 students of colour and one white student, which is the opposite to what it's saying, right? But there were photos taken of our students training. So it was a way of going, oh, this is what this space looks like. So going on targeting those students, also, or telling a little story. So when I went to speak to some of the classes, that was one thing we did. We set up a social media account, and again, it was trying to be as purposeful as we could in terms of what images were on there, letting the students have some say in the music. I made the mistake one week of letting them pick a Dr. Dre song and then they dropped the N-words. Like, and I had to quickly delete that because there's no way I could have that on a universal social media account. But it was, I went back and looked at instrumental. But it was a case thinking about those details. What we wanted to do, and we never managed to get going, which probably one of the things that impacted some of the longevity of our impact, was actually to employ students from our target demographics within the setting. What we struggled with is we were offering them a couple of hours in working here, a couple of hours in working there, and it's 1.5 versus a shift somewhere. So that, I think, was some of the challenges I came first.
Can I just briefly follow up? Sorry. From an arts perspective, obviously, gender is
Yes.
It's a huge thing. The social media and
Yes.
students is really important to look a certain way, you know, the whole side of that side of things. But from the arts, I don't think there's anything that besides the benefit of the impact the arts and how those about how that was.
And we had a very different cohort. So our arts cohort, Fiona will probably tell you this, a lot of them actually came via our wellbeing service. Some of them came via our disability and dyslexia service. And that was run by one of our disability and dyslexia individuals. And actually, you'd often get someone who registered with him, and they go, "Oh, I don't really like talking to people. I don't really like making friends with some of our neurodiverse students." I was like, "Oh, what are they called? That's the art session." And so it was just a different way of selling it. And again, it was then a case of getting people to set up in.
Sorry, I just want to say, I think the choice of activities is also key to the student self-selecting. So I think making something feel like it's attractive rather than you should come along to this because it's good for you. It's well, actually, guys, it's a free gym session. That's quite attractive. Or I've got all these like games out. Someone's giving me some ideas that it's a quiet space for us. It's just thinking about what would attract them. Some of the feedback students say about what would make their journey at university feel more welcoming to them was more connected during the day, more or less revolving around alcohol, sport. So you're offering alternatives to those students.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I hope you join me in thanking Michael and please continue the conversation on. We've got lunch next. We'll be back at 2. Thank you. We'll be back here at 2 to continue the conversation with some students. But in the meantime, you can join us at lunch.